Recorded Books and RB Digital present Into Darkness, a Children of Dahara novel. Episode 5 by Terry Goodkind. Narrated by John Skelly. Chapter 1. When hands gently lifted Kahlan from the ground, she came awake. Not fully awake, but awake enough to be aware of the red leather of a number of moored Sith surrounding her. She was aware, too, of the pain. That terrible, deep pain that told her that her pregnancy was in serious trouble. Overriding the pain was a sense of helpless panic that there was nothing she could do about it. In her dim, dazed vision, she saw Shale leaning close. Kahlan grabbed her sleeve. "The babies. Are they all right?" Those carrying her by holding the edges of the blanket she was lying on paused as Kahlan desperately held on to Shale's sleeve. Even in her semi-conscious state, she caught the sidelong glance the sorceress gave some of the moored Sith. "Hurry, and get her inside," Shale said to the others. Kahlan looked around as they started out again. Her vision grew dim at times, but she could see that they were carrying her into some kind of crude shelter. When she rolled her head to the side, she saw a lean-to wall at the back. It looked to have been hastily constructed of sapling poles covered in pine and spruce boughs. The moored Sith gently laid her down on a bed of grasses and fern fronds. The whole shelter was roughly made from materials at hand, but at least it helped protect her from the cold wind. Cassia knelt down beside her and laid another blanket over the top of the one already there to keep her warm. It was cold out, but Kahlan felt hot. She was already so hot she was sweating. She had to blink sweat from her eyes. Shale turned a little and cast a hand outward, sending flame into wood that had already been carefully stacked for a fire behind her. As soon as it blazed up, Kahlan felt the added warmth of the crackling flames. The next moment, she was overcome with a flash of cold shivers. The sheen of sweat suddenly felt like ice on her face. At least the lean-to helped reflect the heat back now that she was suddenly cold. Moments later, though, the heat again felt oppressive. Sweat once more poured off her face and stung her eyes. As soon as she didn't think she could endure how hot she was, she turned back to shivering with sudden chills. The breeze that made it into the shelter felt icy. When the sorceress passed close enough, Kahlan once again grabbed her sleeve. "Shale, talk to me. I'm burning up one moment, and the next I'm freezing. What's going on?" "You have a bit of a fever. But are my babies all right?" Shale patted her shoulder and flashed a brief smile. "You need to rest. That is the best thing you can do for them right now. Please, Mother Confessor, you need to lie still." Instead of following instructions, Kahlan tried to sit up. The sorceress rushed to push her back down onto a pillow made of a folded blanket. "You must not do that, Mother Confessor. Just lie still. Try to go back to sleep." "I'm not going to go to sleep until you tell me what's going on. Are my babies all right?" Shale pulled her lower lip through her teeth as she considered whether or not to answer the question. She shared looks with some of the others standing over Kahlan. "Shale, you are having some difficulty. Nothing that can't be set right." Set right. From Shale's tone of voice, Kahlan didn't know if the sorceress believed that it could be set right. Kahlan looked around. Given the moored Sith's grim expressions, she didn't think they did. "Where is Richard? Why isn't he here? He should be here with me. What happened? What's going on?" Shale sighed as she realized from the confused panic in Kahlan's voice that she wasn't going to settle for anything less than the truth. "You are having some difficulty with the pregnancy." Kahlan was already aware of that much of it. Difficulty? What does that mean? What difficulty? "The babies are in danger of miscarrying." Kahlan blinked. "But I can't lose them." Shale pulled the blanket up a little, tucking it under Kahlan's chin. "Lord Rawl and Vika went to find a plant I need to heal you, to save your babies. Once he returns with that herb, I will make you a medicine that should set you right." Kahlan clearly caught the word should. It wasn't a word that inspired confidence. What plant? It's called Mother's Breath. Kahlan had grown up in the Confessor's Palace and the Wizard's Keep. She didn't know much about the woods and plants, except what Richard had taught her. When she had been young, wizards, too, taught her a little about herbs. She couldn't remember ever hearing of Mother's Breath. Will he be back soon, then? Shale smiled. It was clearly forced. Just as soon as he finds me some Mother's Breath so I can make you all better. You need to lie still until then. You will make it worse for the babies if you try to move too much. Lying still is the best thing you can do right now to help them. Suddenly fearing that she might be hurting them by trying to sit up, Kahlan relaxed back onto the makeshift bed. She did feel better at hearing that Richard was going for a medicinal plant. Richard knew a lot about healing herbs. She appreciated the moored Sith and the sorceress being there, but what she really wanted was Richard at her side, telling her that everything would be all right. Kahlan stared up at the roof of pine and spruce boughs, searching for courage to ask a terrible question. Am I going to lose my babies? Shale leaned in, her face tight with concern. No, Mother Confessor. I don't want you to have such a thought. I'm with you, and Lord Rawl will be back with what you need. Now that we have you inside a shelter and out of the cold wind, the best thing you can do for the twins is to rest until he returns. It's important for the babies that you don't try to move right now. Kahlan felt a tear running down the side of her face. Please, I can't lose them. I've already lost my first child. She fought to keep control of her voice. I can't lose the twins. Tell me what's going on. Don't lie to me to try to make me feel better. Being kept in the dark is not helping me. I want to know the truth of what's happening. Shale regarded her with a long, solemn look. All right. I suppose you have a right to know. She took a deep breath before she began. For some reason, the babies are trying to be born before their time. It's too early. I don't know the reason this is happening. I've seen this occur before in women I've helped back in the Northern Waste. The truth is, if they are born now, they will die within minutes, if they are even born alive. With the way this kind of thing goes, that would be unlikely. Kahlan stared up at the woman. She heard the words, but she was having trouble understanding them. This couldn't be happening. Everything had been going well with her pregnancy. These were the children of Dahara. They had to be born and grow up to protect their world. Kahlan realized she was panting in fear as well as pain. But you've handled this kind of thing before, haven't you? She asked Shale. You said that you attended many births, even difficult pregnancies. You've seen this before? The sorceress nodded. That's right. From the time I was young, I went with my mother and she taught me to use my gift to help where it was necessary. I would guess that I've attended hundreds of births. But what about trouble like I'm having? Have you helped with that as well? Shale pursed her lips, considering for a moment. I told you I wouldn't lie to you, and I won't. I've seen situations like this maybe 6 or 8 times. Kahlan looked up expectantly. And were you able to help? Were you able to save the babies? Holding Kahlan's gaze, she slowly shook her head. I'm afraid that in every case like this that I've seen, despite what I did, not one of the babies survived. Kahlan swallowed back her fear. What about the mothers? Shale, with a grave look, shook her head again. None of those mothers survived either. Kahlan's muscles went slack. Her weight sank back. The world seemed to be spinning. That was the end, then. The end of everything. Shale put a hand gently on Kahlan's shoulder. But we have things on our side that I didn't have any of those other times. Kahlan looked up. What things? In every one of those cases, someone had to come to get me, so I wasn't there from when it started. With you, I was right there at the beginning, so I was able to use a bit of my gift to try to stabilize the situation right from the first, before it was already too late, the way it was with those other women. Can you heal me then? Heal the twins? Can you do something for us? Before I came here from the northern waste, I would have said no. It is beyond what is possible. But since I have arrived, I have seen things that I would not have thought possible. I have seen Lord Rahl heal wounds that could not be healed. I have seen you bring him back from the dead. I have seen Lord Rahl do things that I used to know with certainty could not be done. If you and Lord Rahl have taught me anything, it is that we are all more than we may think we are. That we should never give in to despair and defeat. That we should never give up. I intend to save you and the twins, even if I have never been able to do such a thing before. That is the long and short of it. I will keep all three of you alive until Lord Rahl returns with the herb that can reverse what is happening so that you can carry the twins until it is time for them to be born. Kahlan felt more tears run down the side of her face. Thank you, she whispered. Shale leaned in and placed one hand on Kahlan's forehead and the other on her swollen belly. Now, I'm going to put you into a deep sleep in order to slow down what is happening. I will do everything I can to help the twins stay in the safety of your womb until your husband returns with the mother's breath. When he does, it will heal you. Until then, you need to sleep. The next time you wake, if I am half the sorceress I think I am, half the woman you have taught me to be, you will be well on the road to being set right. Kahlan wanted to say something, but before she could, magic swiftly brought darkness that took her. Chapter 2. Richard lifted his shoulder, trying to shelter his ear from a frigid gust of wind. His fingers and ears ached from the cold. As the sun sank behind the mountains, not only was the light fading fast, but the temperature high up in the mountains seemed to be dropping even faster. The cold, though, was the least of Richard's concerns. He urgently needed to get even higher up in the mountains to the tree line to find the mother's breath plant if he was to save both Kahlan and their unborn babies. Vika had told him that mother's breath had odd, lopsided leaves. She held up her fist with the back of her hand facing him. The shape of the leaves looks like this. If you ever saw it once, you would never forget it, but it's rare. I've only seen it a couple of times in my life, and then only up in the mountains near the tree line. Richard dared not let himself worry about how rare it was. He just needed to get up to where it grew so he could search for it. He told himself that he was going to find it, and that was that. The tree line, though, was still quite some distance away and much higher up the mountains. It was slow going trying to find an uncharted way up among the rocks and often dense trees of the steep and rugged terrain. It was difficult enough in the day, but he knew that in such mountainous country where there were no trails, it would be virtually impossible for the horses to climb once it was dark. He also knew from Shale's urgency that time was critical to Kahlan's survival, so darkness or no darkness, one way or another, he intended to press on. Since the horses couldn't continue on in darkness, as soon as he found a place to leave them, he intended to keep going without them. An all too familiar memory came to mind. Zed had always said that nothing was ever easy. Richard forced the thought from his mind as he turned his attention toward an opening between a stand of young spruce trees. Beyond was a jumble of rock with just enough space for the horses to pass through. It was the only way he could find that looked to have any chance to lead them higher. Richard was using all his knowledge and experience as a woods guide to find a way to steadily make it to higher ground. Occasionally, game trails helped. Even so, without a real trail, they had a number of times come to the base of impassable cliffs that forced them to find another way around so they could keep going up. Other times, what had looked like a good route ahead ended at a drop-off that forced them to backtrack and find another way in order to keep going. Richard tried to scan the mountainside higher up while his horse carefully picked its way over the loose rock between tall rock formations rising up to either side. Water seeped down the faces of some of the speckled rock, leaving green and brown streaks. Plants, growing in the cracks, hung down in places, making it look like green walls. Tangles of roots here and there made the footing tricky. He wanted the horse to hurry, but he knew that it was climbing as fast as it could. It was almost as if it could sense his urgency. As they made steady progress ever higher, they entered low clouds. The soft gray blankets rolled over the jutting towers of rock as if trying to find a way down. As they climbed upward into the clouds, it made the granite the horses had to walk over slick and the footing dangerous. In places, the horses had difficulty on the steep ground, only made worse in the wet. Their hooves slipped repeatedly before they could find adequate grip. He knew that in such steep country, going back down would be considerably more difficult for the horses than going up. It would likely be too dangerous in many places to ride down. For much of the way down, he knew they would have to do the descent on foot, letting the horses pick their way without having to also deal with a rider who would make it more difficult for them to balance. But first, they had to find the plant Shale had sent them for. That was all that mattered. Vika followed behind without comment. She was his sworn protector, after all, and in addition to wanting to find the mother's breath, as Mord Sith, Richard's safety was her first responsibility. She knew how desperate he was to keep going despite how dark and dangerous it was getting, so she didn't object. With the way the trees found places to grow in among the rocks they were picking their way over, even without the fog, the canopies were too dense for them to see higher up and how much farther they would need to go. Not long before, through an opening in the trees and despite the thickening fog, in a rare moment of clear sky, he had been able to catch a brief glimpse of the mountains towering above them. Through that opening in the trees, he had seen that the tree line was still a great distance away. As it grew darker, he was having trouble picking out a passable route. On top of the darkness, the fog was making it difficult to see very far. Besides cutting visibility, the fog was creating an icy mist that was both miserable and slippery. As they came up into a broad area that was somewhat level, their progress blocked by a fragmented granite wall, Richard frantically looked for a way up. Worried they were again going to have to backtrack, he suddenly spotted something in among the trees atop that vertical granite barrier. "I think I see a trail." Vika rode up beside him and frowned. She looked to each side, seeing that there was clearly no way around. "A trail? Are you sure?" Richard pointed up at the top of the granite. "Look over there to that split in the granite wall. I think it might be a way up." "We can't take the horses up that. It's way too steep." "Yes, but it looks like there are boulders and rock jammed into that crevice that would allow us to climb up it on foot. Look at the top of the wall over to the left by that mass of tree roots coming down over the edge. What do you see?" Vika rested her wrists on the horn of her saddle as she stood in the stirrups and leaned forward, squinting up at the top of the wall. "That's strange. It's foggy and hard to see, but it looks like it might be several stones stacked atop one another." "Exactly." Richard dismounted. "It's a cairn." She frowned over at him. "What's a cairn?" "It's a way to mark a trail in difficult areas where it would be easy or even dangerous to get lost and go the wrong way. If I'm right, and it's not something natural, it would mean we have come across a long-forgotten trail." Vika held her long, single blonde braid in her fist over the front of her shoulder as she frowned up at the top of the wall. "Why would there be a trail up here?" "It could very well be an old trail leading over a pass. It has to be from before the boundary that ran up the spine of these mountains. If I'm right, it may be a way not only to get up higher to the tree line, but to get over these mountains. It could be a trail that leads over a pass and into the Midlands." "The horses can't get up there, that's for sure." "You're right about that," Richard said as he dismounted. Once on the ground, he started to unbuckle the saddle girth strap. "We are going to have to leave them and go the rest of the way on foot. If it really is a trail, this would be an incredible stroke of luck. Once we find the mother's breath and heal Kahlan, then we might even be able to get over the mountains on this trail. That would save us a lot of time getting to Aidendrill." Vika scanned the area before she climbed down out of her saddle. "It's pretty flat here. But what if the horses wander off? It's a risk we will have to take. Let's get the saddles and tack off them, he said. Should we take anything with us? She asked. Richard nodded. We'd better at least take our packs. We should also take some dried meat and whatever supplies we can carry, she suggested. I have some oats tied to the back of my saddle. I will leave some of it out for the horses. That should keep them around. Richard gestured to the left. There is a little water running down off the rocks over there. It's collecting enough for them to get a drink. After we get the saddles off, we need to break out the travel candles. The light is fading fast. But if that really is a trail up there, the candles will help enough that we should be able to keep going. Vika glanced up toward the mountain they could no longer see. Candles in the tin traveling cases won't provide much light. With the fog, even if it was still light out, we wouldn't be able to see very far anyway. With the candles, you can wait at that cairn up there while I scout ahead to see if I can find the next one. When I do, you can come catch up and then wait at that one until I find the next. In that way, if it really is a trail marked with cairns, we can keep going even in the dark. Richard dragged the saddle off his horse and set it on a rock. As Vika did the same, he spread some oats on a flat area of rock. The horses were eager to eat. After giving them a pat on the neck, he swung his pack and his bow up on a shoulder. Vika untied supplies from her saddle. She hoisted her pack up onto her shoulder. Once Richard lit a strip of birch bark with a steel and flint, and it flared up into flame, he then used that to light the candles. They immediately started out into the foggy darkness, climbing up the narrow split in the granite wall. Chapter 3. Not long after daybreak, they had made it up near the tree line and left the trail to search for Mother's Breath among where the snow had started to stick in patches. As eager as he was to find the plant, he had to be careful when he moved across the rocky ground they were searching. If he fell off the mountain, he wouldn't be able to help Kahlan, and in the place they were searching, there was certainly a danger of falling. With the fog now down below them, there was no telling how far it was down some of the drop-offs. The trail they had found was marked well enough with cairns and took a route that made for much easier climbing, at last saving them a lot of time. Richard was sure the trail had to have been laid out long before the boundary between the Midlands and Dahara had gone up, because, like the mountain range, the boundary divided the lands, so there would have been no purpose for a trail over a pass that would have been cut off once the boundary was there. It was fortunate that the cairns were still standing after all that time, and even more fortunate that he and Vika had happened across it. It had worked surprisingly well for Vika to wait at each cairn they found while Richard went ahead to find the next one. Then she would climb to him by the light of his candle and wait at that cairn while he went on ahead to find the next. It was slow going to do it that way, but still a lot faster than wandering aimlessly up the mountains and having to backtrack from dead ends or being forced to climb in difficult and dangerous areas, especially when there was no way to tell if, after a lot of hard climbing, it would end up providing a way to continue. Sometimes it didn't. They had climbed on the trail, following the cairns, throughout the entire night. Richard was too driven to find the plant that could save Kahlan to stop and sleep. Vika was Mord Sith. Mord Sith were trained to do without sleep. Once it had gotten light enough to see, they had been able to make much faster progress following the trail. But their method of continuing to cover ground throughout the night had helped make critically important progress. Now that they were finally up to where the trees were thinning out and they had daylight, they left the trail to search at the base of where the snow had begun to stick, hoping to find Mother's Breath not yet killed by the ever-descending snow line. "Lord Rahl!" Vika called out. Richard had been using his hands to keep his balance on the steep ground as he searched under brush and the lower sides of rock ledges that were still free of snow. Shale had told him that she needed living plants with their roots. She couldn't use them if they had been killed by the snow. He stood and looked off to his right. "What is it?" "I found it." It felt as if his heart came up in his throat. He scrambled over a rounded projection of rock and through several patches of snow then held on to the low-growing, thick juniper brush to help keep from sliding down loose scree. Richard found Vika sprawled on her belly in front of an opening in the rock. The rising sun was at their backs, so it lit the entrance to the small cave. Vika pointed. "Look, it's Mother's breath. It's protected in here from the snow, so it's still alive." There were 3 plants to her left, where she was pointing, and a couple more to the right side just inside the cave's maw. They had fist-shaped leaves, just as she had told him. She had been right. After seeing those odd, lopsided leaves, he knew they were a plant that he would never forget. Just inside the opening of the cave, where Vika was on her belly, wouldn't quite be high enough to stand in, but it was enough to protect the plants. Richard looked deeper, and suddenly saw what Vika hadn't noticed in her desperate search for the rare plant, and her excitement at having found it. In the snow to either side of the cave, and in the soft ground of the entrance, were the prints of a large cat. Farther back in the cave, where rays of the rising sun reached, he spotted a variety of bones. Farther still, back in the darkness, Richard saw a pair of eyes reflecting the light. When he thought he heard the low rumble of a throaty growl, he drew his sword. Vika looked back over her shoulder when she heard the distinctive sound of his blade being drawn. "What's the matter?" Richard gestured with his sword. "There's a mountain lion back in there." Vika froze. "What do we do?" Richard carefully put one knee down beside her and leaned in, holding the blade protectively out over the top of her. He put his left hand on the back of her shoulder to keep her down as he spoke quietly, so as not to alarm the animal hiding back in the darkness. "Dig up the 3 plants right there by your left hand. Shale said she needed the whole plant, so dig out the roots. We need to get all of the roots you can dig out. 3 plants should be more than enough. Leave the other 2 on the other side to help them regrow. While you dig these 3 out, I'll watch and make sure that mountain lion stays back." "All right," she said as she quickly pulled her knife from the sheath at her side, drove it into the ground, and used it to help her start digging. With her fingers and the blade, she dug down through the relatively soft, rocky dirt, frantically flicking it back like a badger digging a den. As she worked, the animal back in the cave crept forward into the light, enough for Richard to see its face and yellow eyes. It was indeed a formidably large mountain lion, and by its low, rattling growl, an unhappy one at that. The creature drew back its upper lip, revealing big teeth, as it opened its mouth a little to let out a louder, guttural growl. As it took another step forward with a big, broad paw, Richard poked the blade toward its face, just enough to make his defensive intentions clear. It took 2 steps closer, head hunched down, ears laid back, eyes locked on him. Powerful muscles in its shoulders flexed as it growled while taking another step closer. "Don't make me kill you," Richard said to the beast. "I don't want to kill you, but I will if I have to. Just wait a moment until we're done here, and then we will be on our way." For the time being, the blade was keeping it back. The mountain lion stopped, almost as if it understood his words. More likely, it understood the blade in its way. Vika dug with her fingers as fast as she could, throwing the dirt back, trying to dig down and expose the roots without damaging them. All the while, Richard and the mountain lion stared each other down. Vika clawed at the ground and was finally able to bring the first plant out of the deep hole she had dug. It had a long, thick taproot. She got almost all of it out, shook the dirt off the roots, set it aside, then went back to excavating the other 2. Richard could see that it wasn't easy digging while on her belly, but she worked as fast as she could, letting out little grunts of effort. Her fingers were bloody, but that didn't slow her down. Richard carefully reached down with his left hand, as he kept the mountain lion at bay with a sword in his right, and set the mother's breath already out of the ground safely up on a small ledge that formed the roof of the cave. When Vika, panting with the effort, brought out the second, he took it from her and set it up with the first. Having loosened the ground as much as she needed to with her knife, she returned it to the sheath and went back to clawing out the dirt around the roots of the 3rd mother's breath plant and flicking it behind. "Got it." With the third plant in her left hand, Vika squirmed back. When she was back far enough, she got to her hands and knees under the protection of Richard's sword and collected the other two as he continued to guard her. After she had the 3 mother's breath plants clutched in her hand, the 2 of them slowly retreated from the mouth of the cave. The mountain lion matched their movement, slowly slinking out with them while maintaining a safe distance until it emerged from the darkness and into the light. Richard gripped Vika's arm with one hand and pulled her behind him while he held the sword out with the other. Together they moved off to the side away from the angry animal. Once they had left it enough room to escape, the mountain lion emerged from the cave, gave them a long, uncomfortable look, and then gracefully bounded off to their right, over the snow and among the sparse trees. "It's heading toward the trail," Vika said as she pulled out a blanket to wrap up the plants. "That's an odd coincidence." Richard watched where the mountain lion was slipping away. We're long and well past the realm of coincidence. Chapter 4. Quiet darkness was settling into the woods when Richard spotted Nida on watch, long before she spotted him and Vika. When she finally did see him, she ran out and whistled a bird call he had taught the Mord Sith to alert the others that they had returned. Rika then emerged from a thick underbrush behind him. He hadn't spotted her. He was glad to see that they were using the tactic of positioning one person on watch so as to be spotted and distract anyone approaching. If it turned out to be a threat, the one still hidden could then take out that threat from behind. Even though he was glad to see them using their heads, he had more important things on his mind. Richard and Vika were both exhausted from the long ride up the steep terrain, climbing the trail in the dark the entire night before, the hunt along the steep and difficult ground for the mother's breath, the tense encounter with the mountain lion, and then the difficult journey back down the mountains to where they had left Kahlan, Shale, and the rest of the Mord Sith. As they galloped into camp, Richard leaped off his horse. Berdine ran in and took the reins of both horses as Vika jumped down and handed Richard the blanket with their precious cargo. Shale was adding a stick of wood in the fire when she saw them ride in. She stood and then rushed to meet them, brushing crumbs of bark from her hands. "Do you have it?" Richard flipped open the blanket to show her. "How is Kahlan?" Shale gently lifted out all 3 plants, using it as an excuse to divert her gaze. She looked amazed that they had actually found some mother's breath. 3? This is wonderful. And you managed to recover them with their taproots intact. I had dared not hope you would find even one. This is exactly what we need." I asked how Kahlan was. Shale looked up from under her brow. "The Mother Confessor is asleep." Richard gently grabbed Shale's upper arm. I asked how she is. The sorceress considered the intensity in his eyes briefly before answering. "She was losing the babies, and her life along with theirs. The only thing I could think to do until you returned with the mother's breath was to use my gift to immerse her in a form of very deep sleep. I had to put her in that place between life and death. You called it the cusp. My hope is that inducing such a profound sleep will slow down all the functions in her body enough to keep her from miscarrying. It was the only way I could think of to save her and the twins. So far, she still has the babies, and she is still breathing. But she will be all right." It came out more like a command than a question. He didn't like to hear that the sorceress had pushed Kahlan to the cusp between life and death. He didn't like it one bit. But he didn't want to second-guess her decisions. He knew the extent of the emergency, and that Shale would do everything she could to save Kahlan. "Now that we have the mother's breath, will she be all right?" The sorceress hesitated. "I hope so. At least for now, she and the twins are alive and together. With the mother's breath, we have a chance. Now, I must hurry and prepare the medicine she needs." "What can I do to help?" Richard asked as he followed close behind her as she hurried back to the fire. Shale paused and considered a moment, looking toward the lean-to beyond a crackling fire before gazing at the 3 plants resting in her hand. I need to prepare the remedy, but that is going to take several hours. Since you were able to bring 3 plants, and considering the seriousness of the situation," she handed Richard the one with the longest taproot, "maybe there is something you can do to help. Take this one. Go to her. Break off the bottom tip of the root, and then let the milky fluid drip into her mouth. She needs to swallow it. Do it only when you have it over her mouth so you don't waste any. It is a very rare and precious substance." "If I'm going to let some of the milk drip into her mouth, why do you need to prepare a remedy?" Shale didn't shy away from his gaze. "Lord Rawl, please do as I ask and hurry." Richard was concerned that she was deviating from the plan of preparing the plants first. He knew a great deal about plants and herbs, but he didn't know anything about mother's breath or how it needed to be prepared. He did know that there were plants that, when prepared properly, could heal, but he also knew that when raw and not properly prepared, they could kill. "Will it harm her to give her the raw milk of the plant? Are you sure you shouldn't prepare it first?" Shale touched her fingers to the hollow of her neck as she considered it a moment. It was apparently a question that worried her, too. "To tell you the truth, I can't be sure. I've never heard that mother's breath is poisonous, but also I've never heard of giving a miscarrying woman the milk of the plant raw, rather than in a prepared remedy. I do know that the healing power of the plant lies in the milk." She held up a hand and rubbed her first 2 fingers together with her thumb. "It's a sticky substance, much stickier than the milky sap in any other plant. I believe that sticky quality is what may be the key to how the plant helps stop a miscarriage. I was told by an herb woman I knew that she believed the sticky milk of the mother's breath plant strengthens the bond the mother's body has with the unborn babies, keeping them in her womb. But to be honest, I've never heard of the milk being given raw. My thought is that women are always given the prepared potion, but that may be because living plants are never at hand, whereas the preparation can be made up ahead of time and kept in stock, sealed in jars, ready for when needed in an emergency." "Then to be safe, why not just wait until you can prepare the plants the way you were taught?" Shale gave him a meaningful look. "Because it took you a long time to find the plant. Too long. I realize that's not your fault, and it is remarkable that you were even able to find it at all. But as far as the life of the mother confessor is concerned, it took too long. That's the reality. The only reason she hasn't miscarried and she is still alive is because I was there right when it started, and so I was able to put her into that deep state of sleep before it had advanced too far. Traditionally, the remedy is prepared by an herb woman for those times when it is urgently needed. That is often later when a healer has been summoned, so much time would have already passed by the time any help reached the mother. My intention was to prepare the plant in that way, but it took you a long time to return. Too long. But if you were to prepare it, to be honest, Lord Rawl, even though she is in a deep sleep, I don't think your wife can last long enough for me to prepare the plants. My hope is that the raw milk will stop the miscarriage and keep the 3 of them alive and together until the preparation is ready. For all I know, the raw milk might even work better, and then the prepared potion wouldn't even be needed. But what I can't say is that it won't do harm. In my judgment, we have to chance it." "It's a big chance," he said. "It is," Shale agreed with a nod. "I leave the choice to you, then. You are her husband and would know best what her wishes would be. You decide for her. What would she want you to do?" Richard didn't have to think about it. "She would say that it's the only chance for her and the babies, so we have no choice but to try it." Shale offered him a brief smile. "Hurry, then, and give it to her." Richard gripped the plant in his hand as he nodded. "How long will it take you to prepare the other 2? She looked over at the fire. "To boil it down and prepare the remedy will take a few hours. I think you have made the right decision in the meantime. You must give her some of the raw milk now." Richard looked down at the plant she had handed him. Could it hurt her? Could it hurt her if it's raw, or hurt the babies? I already told you that I just don't know. The sorceress glanced over the fire to the still Mother Confessor. But I think that the problem may actually be if it works too well. Richard frowned. What do you mean? Shale looked back at him. I mean that it may bind the babies into her so well that it may prove difficult for her to give birth. Well, then, maybe. Lord Rawl, there is no time. It is already long past when she should have been given the potion that I have yet to cook. By all rights, she shouldn't even still be alive. I doubt she will be for much longer. If you have made your decision, then you must do it now, or she will be lost. Richard let out a troubled sigh as he gently gripped the plant in his fist. He knew that there was really no choice. He just wished it were not a choice he had to make. Shale put a hand on his forearm as if to steel him. Hurry now. Go to her. Chapter 5. Richard's fear for Kahlan had him feeling like he was watching himself from somewhere high above the campsite as he rushed around the fire to the lean-to. If he had made the wrong decision, he could very well be about to poison the only woman he had ever loved, the only woman he ever could love. He found Kahlan laid out just under the shelter of the lean-to on a bed of grass. She was covered with blankets. He marveled at how exquisite she looked in her deep sleep. It was the perfect innocence and beauty of a child. He hoped the sleep was a peaceful one. He knew, though, that if Shale really had succeeded in putting Kahlan in that nowhere place between the world of the living and the world of the dead, it was anything but peaceful there. The keeper of the underworld would be whispering promises to her, urging her to take that last step and enter his eternal realm of rest. Richard knew all too well that it was a seductive call, and difficult to resist. But he knew, too, that she would be trying with all her will to resist so that her babies would have the chance to live. If she was able to resist that longing to be free of pain and suffering, it would be for them. Cassia was there as well, on the opposite side of Kahlan from the fire, sitting on the ground beside her, holding her hand in both of hers. As Richard knelt down beside her, Cassia offered a hopeful smile as she moved back out of the way. "How is she?" he asked back over his shoulder. Cassia's voice was heavy with anguish. "She hasn't moved since Shale put her in a deep sleep. I was relieved, though, when she did, because the Mother Confessor was struggling terribly in pain. I ached myself at seeing her in such agony. At least she is breathing more easily now." Richard nodded and turned back to Kahlan. He pushed her chin down until her mouth fell open. With his thumbnail, he clipped off the bottom of the taproot. One drop of the milky white sap dripped on her cheek before he could get the tip of the root over her mouth. As he held the plant over her with one hand, letting the milky fluid slowly drip into her mouth, he swept the drop up with a finger and wiped it onto the inside of her lower lip. Even though she was still not conscious, Kahlan's tongue worked at the contact with the milky fluid. When the dripping slowed to a stop, Richard pushed up on her jaw to close her mouth. He knew she needed to get it into her stomach, so he was relieved to see her swallow. After she had swallowed a few times, he opened her mouth again, then snapped off the taproot halfway up. When he did, more fluid began running out, dripping into her mouth. Once the flow finally stopped, he closed her mouth again until she swallowed, then opened it and snapped the root off where it turned to the green stem. An even more plentiful, thicker flow started to drain from the rest of the plant. He understood, then, why Shale had told him that it had to be a living plant. A dead and dried-up plant would have no milky sap. When the flow stopped, he worked his fingers to gradually wad up the plant in his fist. He squeezed to force out as much fluid as possible. When he was sure the dripping was finished, he handed the crumpled plant to Cassia. "Take this to Shale. There may still be some milk in the plant that she can add to the medicine she's making." Cassia nodded, and then raced off to take the crumpled plant to the sorceress. Sitting on the cold ground beside Kahlan, Richard watched as Shale tore the plant into small pieces and added it to the steaming pot she already had cooking on the fire. She reached into a pocket of her trousers and pulled out a pouch. From the pouch, she added a few pinches of some kind of powdered preparation to the pot. As she stirred the boiling potion, Richard lay down close beside Kahlan to help keep her warm. He gently ran a hand over her round belly, hoping she would know that he was there with her. As much as he wanted to stay awake, he was exhausted and soon nodded off into a troubled sleep. He hadn't been asleep long when he heard Shale speaking to some of the moored Sith. He sat up and rubbed his eyes. The brief nap had done nothing to banish his exhaustion. To his side, Vika sat on the ground, watching over him and Kahlan. He knew that she had to be just as tired as he was. "Why don't you lie down and get some sleep?" "I will," she answered, "but not until after the Mother Confessor gets the medicine Shale is preparing." He looked over at Shale, squatted down beside the fire, leaning over the pot she had set on the ground, continually stirring the preparation. She lifted the stick out, letting the concoction drip off to test its consistency. She dipped her little finger into it to test if it had cooled enough. Apparently it had. She gave an order to one of the moored Sith. Vale quickly stood and rushed to one of the saddlebags. She dug around until she came up with a piece of cloth. Shale urged both Nida and Vale to hold all four corners of the cloth. When they had, she slowly poured the pot of liquid in the cloth to filter the preparation and let it drip into a tin cup she had placed on the ground. Once the liquid had mostly dripped through, she took the cloth and twisted it around and around. She grimaced with the effort of squeezing out all the remaining liquid. When she was finished, she threw the cloth and its contents onto the fire. Blue and green flames and glowing sparks shot up from the cloth as it burned, lighting the trees all around in flickering colored light. After dispensing with the filter cloth, she picked up the cup and hurried to Kahlan. She knelt down on the other side and set down the cup before putting a hand to Kahlan's forehead, checking on her fever. "That's good. Her fever is down," Shale told Richard. She gestured. "Sit her up for me." He carefully and gently scooped an arm under Kahlan's shoulders and lifted her. Kahlan's head slumped to the side. Shale straightened her head and then put her fingers on Kahlan's temples with her thumbs over her eyes. She softly spoke some kind of chant. Richard couldn't hear the words well enough to understand them. He doubted that even if he could hear them well enough, he would have known what the words were. He assumed it was some sorceress's or even witch's spell. Sorceresses, and likely witchwomen, often relied on spells. Whatever it was, it caused Kahlan to gasp in a deep breath along with Shale. Richard noticed that Shale synchronized her breathing with Kahlan's for a moment. Finally, the sorceress took her hands away, and Kahlan opened her eyes. Richard jumped a little in surprise. "Kahlan!" He was excited to see her awake. "How are you feeling?" The sorceress swished a hand. "She can't hear you. She is still in that deep place. I don't want her to choke or drown when I give her the preparation." Indeed, Kahlan seemed completely unresponsive. Though her eyes were open, it didn't seem like she saw anything. Still, Richard felt hope at seeing her beautiful green eyes. There was life in them, and that was cause for hope. As he held Kahlan up, Shale brought the tin cup with the milky potion to her lips. As she tipped it in, Kahlan began to drink it. It took a while for her to slowly drink it all. When she had, Shale took the cup away and motioned for Richard to lay her back down. As he did, Kahlan's eyes closed once more. Shale stood and let out a weary sigh. "Now we must let the mother's breath do its work. Both what you gave her and what I prepared. When it has done all it can, and if it is enough, she will wake on her own from the deep sleep and be fully back in the world of life. Until then, let her rest. Tonight determines if she will survive this ordeal or not. Until then, we all need to sleep to be able to face what tomorrow holds." Richard couldn't take issue with that. He nodded as Shale went to her nearby bedroll. She looked exhausted. Richard was as well, but he was worried that the medicine might not work. He was terrified that he might lose Kahlan this night. But at least she seemed to be resting peacefully. What terrified him more was that she might instead rest peacefully for eternity with the good spirits. He leaned close. "Life is a struggle," he whispered to her. "Fight for me, for us, for our children." When he was finished and sat back up, Cassia touched his shoulder. "Berdine and I will watch over her tonight. You and Vika need to get some sleep." Richard didn't want to sleep. More than his better judgment, it was his exhaustion that made him lie down beside Kahlan. He kissed her cheek and then gripped her hand in his. Chapter 6. Richard was having a wonderful dream that Kahlan was kissing him. As it always did, the feel of her soft lips on his seemed to open up the feminine half of the universe to him. It was a profound completion of his reason for being. It made him whole. As he was kissing her, something made him open his eyes. He abruptly realized that it wasn't a dream. It was not yet dawn, but through the trees he could see the eastern sky just beginning to brighten a bit. Her hair had fallen down to flow around his face. Flickering firelight gave her face a warm glow as she pulled back and looked down at him with that radiant smile he knew so well. "You were sleeping so peacefully. I didn't want to wake you." The smile widened with mischievousness. "But I couldn't resist kissing you." Richard let out a deep breath of relief as he embraced her, holding her tight to him. His fears melted away in that moment. He finally gripped her shoulders and lifted her back away from him. "How do you feel?" Her mouth twisted playfully. "Pretty good now that I've had a kiss." "No, I mean everything else." He looked at her skeptically. "Are you all right?" She shrugged. "I feel surprisingly well, actually. I think I was having a terrible nightmare, and it felt like I was asleep forever in some faraway place. I didn't like being in that place. While I was sleeping, I thought I heard you say that life is a struggle, and I should fight for you, for us, and for our children. So I did, and woke up." Seeing that Kahlan was awake and up, Shale threw off her blanket and rushed around the fire. "Mother Confessor, you're awake! How are you feeling? Don't try to stand. Any pain? Are you hurting anywhere?" Kahlan struggled to sit up as Shale tried to push her back down. "I feel like I've had a very long and restful sleep, actually. I feel fine." As the Mord Sith rushed up around them, Kahlan frowned. "Why is everyone acting so strange?" "You don't remember?" Richard asked. Kahlan made a face as she half-smiled. "No. Remember what?" "You were having difficulty with your pregnancy," Shale said. Kahlan's face suddenly went ashen. "What?" The sorceress waved her hands to dispel the fear from Kahlan's suddenly pale expression. No, everything is fine now. Lord Rawl found a plant I needed to make you some medicine, and it fixed you right up. It was not a big thing, really. You were exhausted and just needed a bit of medicine and rest, so I helped you go to sleep. Don't worry, everything is fine now." Kahlan looked skeptically at all the faces watching her as she ran a hand over her round belly. "Are you sure?" She looked under the blanket. "Where are my trousers?" When everyone was silent for a moment, Rika finally spoke up. "I washed them for you, Mother Confessor. I dried them by the fire. They are ready whenever you want them." "I made some breakfast," Berdine said with a big grin. "I thought you'd be hungry when you woke up. We have fresh fish and rabbit. Which do you prefer? I have to say I like the rabbit best." "Well, actually, I am pretty hungry. The fish sounds good." She tipped her head to look out of the lean-to. "It looks like the weather is no better." Richard glanced out. "At least it's not snowing down here. Fortunately, it's not raining any longer either, at least for now. The weather in these mountains can change in an instant, but I don't think it's going to be getting much better for a while." "Well," Kahlan said, We need to get moving south to try to find a way to get around these mountains if I'm to have these babies at the Wizard's Keep. There can be no going south, Shale said with a frown. Not with that boundary wall of death thing. The boundary? Kahlan's brow twitched a little as she put a hand to her forehead. That's right. I seem to have forgotten that we had run into the boundary. Lord Rawl found a trail leading to a pass over the mountains, Vika said, hoping to dispel Kahlan's sudden concern. Kahlan's mouth fell open. A trail over a pass? That would mean the boundary wouldn't matter, and we can cross the mountains here. That would get us directly to Aidendrill. She looked up hopefully. If there is a pass, we could get over the mountains right away. That would significantly shorten our journey. The sooner the better, Shale said. You aren't getting any less pregnant. I would feel a lot better if we weren't out in the wilderness when the time comes to give birth. Kahlan still seemed somewhat confused. So then I'm all right. The twins are all right? Was I having some kind of trouble? Some of the Mord Sith exchanged glances. Everyone noticed that Kahlan seemed not to remember what had happened. Richard could see no reason to tell her how close she had come to losing the babies, to say nothing of her life. It would needlessly frighten her to know how grave the situation had been. From the looks on all the other faces, it seemed that none of the rest of them thought it would be a good idea to tell her either. Berdine suddenly smiled brightly. Lord Rawl found a plant that made you all well again. Kahlan looked over at him and put a hand on his chest. Was it any trouble? None at all, Vika said from behind Richard. Richard wasn't as happy about the pass as the rest of them. It seemed everything had been conspiring to force them to cross the mountains in this place. Someone was behind the strange woods they lost so much time in. Someone had usurped his ability and used it to put up those boundaries. Kahlan had begun to miscarry, and he had to find a very rare plant to save her and the babies. There just happened to be some of those very rare mother's breath plants up the mountain trail they just happened to come across. Whatever hidden hand was behind all of the recent events seemed determined to get them up into these mountains. And there just so happened to be an old trail for them to use. As soon as we have something to eat, then we should probably get going, he said. There's no telling how long this break in the weather will last. It would be good to make some distance while we have the chance. She flashed him a smile. I would like that. The sooner we are to Aidendrill, the better. I feel well rested. I'm up for some traveling. I'm afraid it's going to be a difficult journey, Richard cautioned her. It's a demanding climb from here to get to the trail, and the trail itself is not an easy one. I'm afraid that once we get to it, there's no way to take the horses up that trail and over that pass. Well, she said thoughtfully, I expect the horses will enjoy their freedom. I'm sure they will be glad not to have to carry us and all our gear any longer. Richard smiled. Kahlan always tried to find the bright side of things. He was sure she was worried about what lay ahead for them, but she didn't want to show her concern. As the mother confessor, she always tried to keep everyone positive. Richard wasn't feeling nearly so positive. As pregnant as she was, it was going to be a difficult journey on foot. Worse, he knew that they were being guided by a hidden hand. Chapter 7. Fat snowflakes drifted through the still, cold air, dissolving away the instant they touched Richard's face and the backs of his hands. Dark, brooding clouds overhead seemed to hang still in the pass, casting the day in gloomy light. Richard could just make out the smell of wood smoke. They all lay in a line on their stomachs in the fresh snow, heads just high enough to peek over the edge of the ridge in order to squint into the distance. Richard was not liking what he was seeing. Why would such a strange place be way up here? Rika asked. Nida pulled the small willow stick she had been idly chewing from her mouth. Maybe it's a stroke of luck. It's not a stroke of luck, Kahlan said, clearly as unhappy as Richard was at what they all saw in the distance. Why not? Nida asked. Shelter, warmth, food, rest? That sounds like a stroke of luck to me. What could be wrong with that? It's a trap, Richard said in a distracted voice as he peered into the distance. That's what's wrong with it. Nida put her